welcome to yet another edition of E-Expressions with the New Indian Express. I have with me former Vice President of India and a man of many parts, Hamid Ansari. Welcome, sir. You have a new book which has raised a lot of controversy as usual. There's nothing that you do that is without controversy. Here it is. Quite a remarkable read because it doesn't just talk about your political and your public career, but also a lot about the times that you lived through. And that is quite fascinating. And in fact, I'd like to begin with your experience at Aligarh Muslim University as a student. And then later, of course, you became Vice Chancellor. And I thought that was quite a lovely period that you describe in the book. Shall we begin with that, sir?
All right. Yes, why not?
Yeah. So would you like to sort of talk about the days that you spent there as a student? And in fact, you wanted to be an academic and you were sort of told off by Irfan Habib, the great Irfan Habib, to...
Not Irfan Habib, the father of Irfan Habib.
Oh, the father. Okay.
Yes.
So,
he was my professor.
Yeah, very fortunate that you were. So he, in fact, told you off and said that you should do as your father desires, right?
About that, in a nice way.
Yeah.
The old man was fond of me.
Right. So talk a little about those days, sir, and then when you went back as Vice Chancellor, because AMU, of course, is also always in the news for reasons good and bad. So talk about your experience there.
No, as a student, I enjoyed being in the university. A lively circle of friends, a lively circle of spokesmen, sportspersons. In fact, we organized, I was involved with the University Cricket Club, and we organized a benefit match for a legendary Indian batsman called Syed Mushtaq Ali.
Right.
And in those days, and I'm talking of late 50s, we raised in the university, essentially from the university community, a princely sum of 10,000 rupees and presented him the purse.
Right.
But it was time of great fun, great intellectual activity, and otherwise also, it was a very lively place.
Right. And of course, then you went into public service. You were a civil servant and you represented India in many countries and quite a distinguished manner. And then, of course, various positions before you became vice president, and you were vice president for 10 years. What was your experience with prime ministers in particular? Because you had very interesting observations about Mrs. Gandhi. Mrs. Indira Gandhi. I think you were chief of protocol when she was prime minister.
That's
and
right.
You have equally interesting observations about the current prime minister, Mr. Modi. So talk about how these two prime ministers were quite important in your life, in your public life.
No, essentially, it was the functional responsibility that was entrusted to me. As head of the state protocol in the time of Mrs. Gandhi, I saw a different aspect of the work of prime ministers, and Mrs. Indira Gandhi was very punctilious about procedures, also very generous when things pleased her. So that is one side of it.
And not so generous when things displeased her. She was quite terse.
Oh, yes, yes,
Terse.
yes. She didn't mince words.
Right.
But it was a good time, and we went through a very important international event in that period.
Right.
That was the 7th Non-Aligned Conference, which was organized in New Delhi at very short notice. Normally, the notice is 3 years. And that particular conference was to have been held in Iraq. But because of the Iran-Iraq war, things were not working out the way they were visualized. And the senior non-aligned leaders, amongst whom was Mrs. Indira Gandhi, consulted amongst themselves. And around October 1982, they prevailed upon Mrs. Gandhi to host the conference.
Right.
So she accepted that as a matter of political principle and a necessity. But then the organizational bandobast, so to say, was a very different story. we didn't have enough time. We didn't have enough hotel space. We didn't have the pool of cars which were required, and all sorts of things. And
Right.
of course, there was also the very important security concern, because the people expected to attend it were Fidel Castro.
Exactly. There was
Uh,
that famous near kiss between her and Fidel Castro, which I still remember as a child. That became quite the headline those days, right?
a remarkable personality, and
Yeah.
it was, but organizing her security was very difficult.
Right.
And I recall a conversation with the uh, senior representative of Cuban security who came in advance, and I explained to him that he should not be worried. We'll take care of it.
Mm.
And the answer was, we are not worried about you. We are worried about our neighbor and its capabilities. So Castro arrived, this might sound strange,
Mm.
in two planes.
Two planes. Okay.
A Cuban plane,
Right.
and um, it was another plane. Whose was it? I'm forgetting just now. But there were two planes
Mm.
landed within a few minutes of each other.
Mm.
And this secret was known only to Mrs. Indira Gandhi
Mm.
and the head of the R&AW at that time,
Who
Mr.
was the head?
Mr. R.N. Cow.
Ah, Mr. Cow was the head. Right. Right. The legendary.
So, that was the kind of thing. Now, his place of stay, we had earmarked
Mm.
a particular hotel
Mm.
for his stay,
Mm.
but he never stayed there,
Oh, okay.
because his security had separately and independently rented a villa where arrangements were to
Mm.
their liking, and so on and so forth. But there
Right.
were others also, from Libya,
General Gaddafi?
not Gaddafi, but his number two.
Okay, he had come.
Landed without much notice, two
Mm.
o'clock in the morning.
Mm.
There was nobody to receive him,
Mm.
but yours truly, spending the night at the airport. Then the Iraqis arrived in their own gung ho way,
Right.
with a lot of weapons on them, and they had to be disarmed at the airport, and so on and so forth.
Right.
Hafiz al Assad came. So
Right.
there were no shortage of prima donnas,
Right.
but they were all taken care of, and they were all satisfied despite our very limited resources.
Hmm.
So it
And
was exciting period.
right. And Mrs. Gandhi, you said was very, very particular about details.
Oh yes, she was.
Yeah.
She was.
Give us a few examples, because she's known to be quite. She was known to be quite punctilious, as you said, about even the menu and about the table decor, about everything.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
Every menu had to be approved by her.
Hmm. Was there
Similarly,
anything that you remember which was
oh, I
particular?
remember a great deal of it,
Yeah.
but that would require at least a longish chapter, and
Right.
I'm sure this is not what you. But I mean, you see, the point about her was that she would worry a great deal about table plans,
Right.
who was sitting where.
Okay.
And on one occasion, I was called in by the late Dr. Alexander, who was her principal secretary,
Right.
and said, Prime Minister is not happy with the table plan.
Mhm.
So I said, well, this is how it is done as per the standard procedures.
Right.
So he said, all right, give me alternates.
Right.
I said, you could change it any way you like, but let me just add one thing. This particular order of arrangements bears the signature of her father.
Right.
I think that's where she said,
That was enough
okay,
convincing. Yeah.
okay, leave it.
Right.
Similarly, on one occasion, I was asked to carry a message
Hmm.
from her to Rashtrapati Bhavan
Hmm.
about a change in seating order.
Yeah,
And
you
I,
mentioned
I was I was very uncomfortable
right.
being the emissary,
Hmm.
because I had some inkling about the state of things there. So I took the liberty of going up to her and I said, where would you like to sit?
Hmm.
And she thought for a while and she said, no, you better let it be. So she was amenable to reason,
Hmm.
and she could be harsh, she could be very generous.
Hmm.
And in all, very interesting person
Hmm.
to interact with.
Right. Also, Mr. Modi is a very interesting person to interact with, and you've interacted with him since he was Chief Minister of Gujarat. And
Yes, yes, yes. I've
you mentioned
interacted
several
with him.
instances, including, your expressing to him your disquiet about his role during the riots, and when he talked to you about the things that he had done for the education of Muslims. You said that he should publicize it, and he said that it did not suit him politically. That's quite a significant statement, isn't
Yes, this was within a week or so of
it?
my being elected
Hmm.
in 2007.
Hmm.
And there are a number of callers by governors, by chief ministers, political personalities, and all. And he was one of the early ones.
Hmm.
And because my previous responsibility was chairman Minorities Commission,
Hmm.
I said to him that had I met you earlier,
Hmm.
I would have asked a question. You see, that time Gudra was very fresh in everybody's mind. So I said to him, "Oh, why did you do it?"
Hmm.
And his response was what I have recorded,
Hmm.
that people look only at this and not my good work. So I said, well, tell me about it. And then he told me what he had done for poor girls of a particular community.
Hmm.
And I said, but this is very good. Why don't you publicize it? And he looked at me, straight at me, and said, that does not suit me politically.
Hmm.
So we left it at that, but we developed a relationship which was very cordial, because as vice president, I had to visit other states, and I visited Gujarat on a number of occasions. And he was always very correct, very cordial. In fact, on one occasion, he asked me if I had seen the white sands,
Hmm.
you know, and of moonlit night.
Hmm.
And I said, no. He says, then you have to change your plans
Hmm.
and come back to be here on a moonlit night and see what it looks like. And it was quite an amazing thing.
Hmm.
So, I mean, our relationship was always very good.
Hmm.
And when he became prime minister, the same continued. So,
Except for
what I meant,
yeah, except for a few hiccups, I think, especially when he was not happy with your conduct, as he felt that you were not very cooperative in passing the bills.
you see, I wouldn't call them hiccups,
Hmm.
because there are more than one way of looking at a situation.
Hmm.
The leader of a party, or a ruling party, or the principal opposition party looks at things in one manner from his or her point of view.
Hmm.
And my point of view, as I said from the first day of my chairmanship of Rajya Sabha, that I am a referee in a hockey match.
Hmm.
Therefore, I watch the game very closely,
Hmm.
like a referee. I'm not a player. I have a whistle, I have a rule book. As long as the game is being played according to the rules, I have nothing to do. But fouls are committed, then I have to blow the whistle. So, I mean, our functions were different. We were looking at the same thing from different angles.
Hmm.
So, leader of a political party or leader of any political party in parliament sees the functioning in terms of his or her interest in proceedings.
Hmm.
I don't hold a grudge for that.
Hmm.
This is what is to be done. Other leaders also did that, leaders of opposition. And I cited an instance where the late Mr. Arun Jaitley, who was leader of opposition all the time that he was in opposition,
Hmm.
and I was still there, he and I had an extremely cordial relationship,
Hmm.
you know.
But the prime minister was also not very happy with the Rajya Sabha TV in particular, and he felt that it was
I
doing
explained to
stories.
him.
Yeah.
No, I explained to him the background
Hmm.
of the TV. The
Hmm.
idea of a parliament TV
Hmm.
was initiated by the late Mr. Somnath Chatterjee, Speaker of Lok Sabha.
Hmm.
At that point, his suggestion that the two houses should combine their efforts and do a joint parliamentary channel
Hmm.
was not accepted by Rajya Sabha for whatever reasons.
Hmm.
the then opposition was not happy about the idea.
Hmm.
So when I became Chairman Rajya Sabha,
Hmm.
and very early in my period, second or third day, Mr. Somnath Chatterjee said, "This is the background,
Hmm.
but it would be so much nicer if we do it together. So
Hmm.
why don't you have another go at it?"
Hmm.
And I said, yes, I would. And I did try
Hmm.
with all the leaders of opposition parties and government party. And after a few months, I went back to him and I said, I now have the agreement. So
Hmm.
let's proceed.
Hmm.
So we set up a committee. One senior person from Rajya Sabha, one senior person from Lok Sabha,
Hmm.
to work out the details. Now that committee ran into some organizational difficulties.
Hmm.
So there was no agreement. And I reported this back to the leaders of political parties in Rajya Sabha. And they said, why can't we start our own channel?
Hmm.
So we started our own channel.
Hmm.
My responsibility was only at the commencement
Hmm.
of taking the decision to start the channel.
Right.
And then the organizational setup, I set up a committee of leaders of parties or their representatives
Hmm.
to give broad guidelines.
Right.
And my only guidance given to the leadership of the Rajya Sabha channel was try to do it on the lines of the PBS,
Hmm.
Public Broadcasting
Yeah.
Service
In America.
in America, in Australia, which I
Hmm.
had experienced firsthand. Beyond that, I never went into it. I had no editorial control. So it was a misperception
Hmm.
that it was my channel. It certainly was not.
And the Prime Minister accepted that explanation, or
Well,
was he still
I mean,
unhappy with it?
let's say our viewpoints didn't quite meet. But that didn't make any difference to our otherwise very cordial relationship, which continues to this day.
Have you met him of late after demitting office?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I meet him at official functions of the state.
Right.
So there is no problem.
But he was less than generous when it came to your farewell speech. He talked about your ideology in very marked fashion, and I wonder what you felt about that. You felt certainly somewhat uncomfortable or discomforted by that.
I was discomforted because uh, that is not the occasion to talk about ideologies.
Mm. Mm.
Farewells are farewells, and their proceedings are recorded. And
Right.
everybody said what should be said on such occasions.
Mm.
But people don't observe that he made two speeches that day.
Mm.
One, what got publicized,
Yes.
which was the first one.
Mm.
The same evening, there was another function in Parliament
Mm.
by members of Parliament to say goodbye to me, at which he spoke. He spoke very differently. I've mentioned that in the book or in
Yes.
one
Yes.
of the footnotes,
Right.
and there is a photograph there which is in the book now,
Mm.
which tells its own story.
Right.
So it is a misperception
Mm.
that there was, some kind of anger, animosity. No, it was not so.
Right. But unfortunately, that perception is the perception that most people still carry.
Well, perhaps some sections of opinion created that perception. I shall not go into it. I have, I'm very comfortable with the way it is.
Right.
And certainly now, 3.5 years after I demitted office,
Yeah.
I lead a very comfortable life um, in retirement.
Right.
And I have expressed it in the
Yeah.
last few lines of the book.
Yeah. But let's talk about your role as a public intellectual. And you, in fact, mention a very interesting quote, which I really liked, which was, I think, from Rajni Kothari, where you say the challenge of the intellectual is to keep alive the flame of hope and resurgence and to continue offering ideological alternatives to the struggling segments of the mass public.
Yes,
Um, and do you feel that this is more important than ever now in the situation that we're in currently?
certainly, but it's always been important.
Hmm.
You see, an alternate viewpoint, particularly in a functioning democracy,
Right.
it may not be quite easy that way
Yeah.
in a non-democratic society, but ours is a democratic society and very proud of it.
Hmm.
And that option of intellectual inputs into alternates
Hmm.
is critical.
Hmm.
Because you see, the point is this, and this is was always my uh, observation about the need for debate in parliament.
Hmm.
You see, the legislative process
Hmm.
of the government, any government, is a very acute one.
Hmm.
Proposed legislation is drafted with great care
Hmm.
by legal and political experts on the government side.
Hmm.
So they take all care to cover possible angles.
Hmm.
But when it comes to the house, and house is a body of people with very varying experiences,
Hmm.
you know, they can tear it to bits
Hmm.
or they can add. And therefore, on many occasions, if you look at the history of parliamentary legislations, many amendments are made,
Hmm.
many amendments are suggested, some are made, suggested but not made.
Hmm.
And then, even after you have finalized a piece of legislation, signed, sealed, and delivered, proclaimed into law, somebody goes to a court,
Yeah.
okay, and challenges an angle which the honorable justices, whether it's High Court or Supreme Court, look at it differently. So, it is never a question of finality of wisdom.
Hmm.
You can add, but only way to discover where the lacuna might be is to let it be aired. And that is why it is not it is important for it to be discussed. And as I saw it, that discussion could not be confined to front benchers and leaders of parties, because there may be a lot of wisdom amongst the backbenchers who are, in point of time, backbenchers, or there may be wisdom amongst nominated members who represent different experiences of life.
But do you feel, just a takeoff point from here, do you feel that that was one of the problems with the three farm bills that have been passed recently? There was not enough debate?
Well, as a matter of principle, I do not comment on the work of my successors.
Hmm.
So I would rather refrain from. The public knows it,
Hmm.
what happened, what did not happen.
Hmm.
Mr. P.D. Achare, who was a very experienced Secretary General of Lok Sabha some years back,
Hmm.
had written a long piece on this in, I think, the Hindu newspaper
Hmm.
some weeks back. So I would like to leave it at that. But what has happened subsequently
Hmm.
and the expression of public opinion that has emanated by not one or two or five people, but thousands of people,
Hmm.
there's surely something to it.
Hmm. Do you agree with the extent of dissent that has been aired in terms of also the, the flying of the flag on the Red Fort?
No, expression of discontent, I don't have to agree or disagree. It's a fact to be observed.
Right.
Flying of the flag on the Red Fort was certainly despicable.
Hmm.
But there is a question which has been raised in subsequent debate as to how did those people
Get.
get to the Red Fort and a particular point in the Red Fort,
Hmm.
which is not easily accessible.
Hmm. You
So
think it was,
somewhere somebody failed.
you think
Why
it
did
was, yeah,
she fail? I don't know.
you think it was our Capitol Hill moment?
It was almost like that. It
Right.
was almost like that, wasn't it?
Yeah. Sir, I'd also like to talk about your role as a leading intellectual. Once said that you should be known as India's vice president and not a Muslim vice president. I, of course, have, I disagree with that. But you do have certain concrete suggestions about how the Muslim community and the majority community can integrate better. And in fact, one of the things that you've talked about is a very interesting three-part action, which I'd just like to state quickly, and then we'll go into it. One, you talk about, which you say is the things that can be done to overcome the inequality trap. One, you say, is action by the state apparatus. Two, an invigorated interfaith dialogue. And three, you say self-correction, which is quite interesting,
Yes, yes,
which is going beyond identity issues. And you talk about Gandhi's union of hearts. So I think these are all very significant recommendations. But do you think it's possible in today's very vitiated atmosphere?
Well, it is for us,
Hmm.
public and the leaders of opinion,
Hmm.
to devitiate the atmosphere.
Hmm.
You see, some years back, when Modi ji made a speech in which he used the expression "Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas,"
Right.
and I welcomed this in a public speech, and I said, "This is very good,"
Hmm.
but for that to be operationalized, you need everybody in the race to be standing at the same starting point.
Hmm.
If somebody is
Right.
behind, then she will remain behind.
Yeah.
So,
Always.
what the expression which got used in Indian political debate, the notorious expression,
Appeasement.
reservations and all,
Yeah.
there's a much better expression: affirmative action. All societies accept the need for affirmative action for those who are lagging behind. And our governments have consistently accepted it.
Right.
But operationalization of it, for one reason or the other, takes time. Sometimes it doesn't get operated.
So, do you feel that there also needs to be an effort by the Muslim community itself to
Oh, absolutely.
integrate better? I found that a very interesting point. Would you like to
A-
develop
a-
on that?
Absolutely. In fact, I talked about it in more than one speech, public speech.
Hmm.
Okay. That there are issues. What are those issues?
Hmm.
There's a issue of feeling of insecurity,
Yes.
which is something that, as you said rightly, responsibility of the state.
Hmm.
But then the other is lagging behind in education,
Hmm.
lagging behind in education of women.
Hmm.
These are things that the community has to address itself. In fact, I gave a speech after I demitted office in Calicut, which was focused on problems of in Muslim women.
Hmm.
And I gave a lot of data there
Hmm.
as to how far behind they are with the rest of the Indian community.
Hmm.
They are not sufficiently educated. They do not participate in public life. They do not leave their homes, like others do,
Hmm.
to contribute to public functioning. So these are things which have to be done, but they have all to be done together.
Hmm.
And an atmosphere has to be, it's a duty not just on the state, but on society, that an atmosphere has to be created
Hmm.
for this to happen.
Hmm.
Gandhiji did it. The freedom movement did it. We saw a more recent example of it a year back in Delhi.
Hmm.
Now, the same women who were accused of living behind high walls and parda and this and that
Yeah.
came out and demonstrated for a longish period of time. Peaceful demonstration. Most of them were Muslim, not all of them were Muslims.
Hmm.
But they had the constitution in one hand.
Hmm.
You see, that is the point. So the demand for participation in civic life is a very healthy development.
Right.
All segments of society must participate in the demand and in the correctives.
Right.
So there's nothing, I mean, when I was on the ramparts, so to say, in New York fighting off the Pakistanis, there was nothing Muslim about it. Huh? As a representative of India in 5-6 countries, there's nothing Muslim about it. I was there as a professional diplomat entrusted with certain functions and certain briefs to implement.
But do you feel that the Muslim leadership, there is an absence of a Muslim leadership? There needs to be a more organized form of more enlightened leadership? Or is it that the women of Shaheen Bagh have shown us that sometimes you don't need a leader, you can just demonstrate your own effectiveness in public life yourself?
That's precisely the point.
Hmm.
You see, notionally, you need a leader. But then this is the experience of history, not only of India, but elsewhere also, that the notional leaders can sometimes be misleaders. So public has to make its own judgment whether the leader, putative leader, is undertaking his or her responsibility or not. You can't dictate to the public.
Right. Do you think we're in a situation where you do see a possible union of hearts, as Gandhiji said, or is it become quite difficult now to imagine such a thing?
Look, it depends which way you look at it.
Yeah.
I mean, across the length and breadth of India, in cities and villages of India,
Yeah.
people of different communities do live together. People of different communities interact with each other.
Yes.
You know, they don't, I mean, when I'm out buying my rations, do I ask a question from the shopkeeper, what is your faith? I don't.
Yeah.
When I put my child in school, do I ask about the faith of the teacher? No. So these are things which are for purposes of political or social convenience, can be rigged up, but they need not be. That's my point. Gandhiji's point was the same. And we lived by it for a very long period of time. It is just that a certain atmosphere has developed in the country and in society in which these artificial lines are being drawn. It's not healthy for the country because society must not be allowed to go into stages of disintegration. It has happened in other countries in the world. You see, when I was High Commissioner in Australia, one Sunday afternoon, I was watching a soccer match on the television. And after the match, the two sides came to fisticuffs. It was unusual. Next day, I told an Australian friend, I said, all your pretensions about being a sporty people stand belied. So he took offense and he said, well, how did you come to this conclusion? And I told him what I had witnessed. So he went back, checked, and came back and said to me, oh, these crazy Yugoslavs. These were the terms he used. So I said, what about it? What are Yugoslavs to do? He says, don't you know that we have 1 million strong Yugoslav community? And different factions fight amongst themselves. The Croats and the Serbs and the Bosnians and all. So this is the kind of thing which can happen in societies. You know, point is you don't allow such situations to develop. That's all. My point is just this. I said this in, I think, my speech in Bangalore, the National Law School. And I would like to reiterate the point. I was Indian ambassador to UN in New York when all those very nasty wars were being fought in former Yugoslavia. And at one point, the commanding general of UN troops was an Indian officer. So, I mean, you try to do what you can. The United Nations tried what it could do. The European Union tried what it could do. But when things go out of control, they go out of control. Never allowed that situation to develop. That's all.
Do you think our institutions are still strong enough to prevent that?
No, I'm afraid not. Again, I said this in the Bangalore lecture, that institutions are not delivering. And I have three simple points. In our system of governance, which is democratic governance in a parliamentary system, the laws are made by parliament and the accountability is to parliament. Now, parliament has procedures for that accountability. But there was a time when the Indian parliament would meet 90, 100 days a year. Now it barely meets for 60 days. So I'm talking of pre-COVID period.
Right.
Now, therefore, the work that parliament should be doing is not being done. Accountability, if, for example, I mean, a bad Indian practice has developed, which is quite unique to India, of parliamentary disruptions.
Right.
Now, disruption means what? Accountability.
Right.
You know, if you disrupt the question hour in parliament, or if you prevent a debate from taking place by simply making noise, then you are letting the government scot-free from its duty of accountability. And that is not good. So that's one part of it. If parliament is not holding the government or the executive of the day for accountability of its actions, then the executive becomes lax. I have seen, I have experienced ministers of the government, this government and that government, feel quite comfortable when the question hour is disrupted.
Welcome it, perhaps.
Welcome it because they don't have to answer. And I know the effort as a former bureaucrat also, that the efforts that have to be made to answer questions, they have to be correct. And there was one occasion when the late Mr. Swaran Singh, legendary foreign minister, held his officers to account. And he ended up by saying that I will forgive all sins, but not a sin committed in relation to parliamentary questions.
Really? Had he got the answer wrong in something?
Something had gone wrong. I don't remember enough. This was addressing down to his senior most officers. So the point is accountability. Then second, I've covered two. The third is judiciary.
Right.
Now, I'm afraid I shouldn't be saying it, and I have to be very careful what I say.
We all have to be careful.
Yes. It's not delivering as it should. If you have, under laws, what is this expression? I'm forgetting now. Anyway, a demand that X person should be produced. And that demand is not heard for months on end. The judiciary is failing in its functions. You see? So my point is, unless all three are functioning, the public expectations are not satisfied. The public demand is not satisfied. And that means that whoever is the ruler of the day, gets scot-free. Now, it may change every 5 years. We have an excellent electoral democracy. Electoral. We are not like what we recently saw in the United States, quibbling about election results, counting of results and things like that. But we are not a functioning democracy in that sense. And there are enough people in the country who have written about it. So I don't have to say it and you don't have to take my word for it,
Right.
because I see whether it was the older generation, Rajni Kothari and others, or people now are saying the same thing.
Do you feel that the 10 years of UPA rule, in comparison to what we have seen now, it's almost midway through the second term of the NDA too. How would you compare these? Because your term was it's sort of coterminous with both, overlapped with both.
Overlapped with both. I
Mm.
mean, they had styles of functioning.
Mm.
I won't like to comment on it for the same reason that told you that I was a referee.
Mm.
So, but there were shortcomings then, there are shortcomings now.
Right. So when the leading commentator said that you should not be known as a Muslim vice president, but as India's vice president, would you like to respond to that?
Was I a Muslim ambassador?
Right,
Huh? Was I?
right.
So
That's your answer to that. Yeah.
that's it.
Mm.
I was chosen for my professional competence for a certain job,
Right.
and that's it.
Mm.
Who chose me, for what purpose, with what intentions, is left to the Prime Minister of the day.
Right. In
So
fact, you talk about it quite interestingly. You talk about getting a message from Sitaram Yechuri that they wanted you to be vice president, and then you met Mr. Manmohan Singh and Sonia Gandhi, who told you formally that they were
I
suggesting.
didn't meet them, they called me.
They called you, of course.
They
There's a
called
big
me.
difference, yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, but
So it's all right. It didn't make any difference to me. I
hmm,
was not a member of the CPM,
right.
nor was I ever a member of the Congress Party.
Hmm,
And I had no political affiliation. My
hmm.
affiliation as a citizen and as an officer is to the Constitution of India. That's all.
I would ask, just a couple of last questions. A very interesting observation that you noted in the book was when the Babri Masjid was destroyed. You say that you talked to the powers that be in Delhi. You were then in Iran, I think,
Yes,
and
yes.
you talked to the powers that be in Delhi, and you were told very clearly that the mosque shall be rebuilt, and that is what you were told to tell the Iranians.
That's a fact.
That is quite interesting
That's a fact.
because it was never rebuilt.
I,
And
fa-
we all
I
know what
faced
happened.
I faced a lot of flack
Mm,
in Iran on that,
mm,
as some of my colleagues in other countries also did.
mm,
And I was told at very responsible levels
mm.
that you can convey this, that it shall be rebuilt.
We all know how that turned out.
Well, these are things that we live and learn.
So when you look at your, the legacy that you will leave, not just as a vice president, but also as a leading public intellectual who has tried to sort of sometimes be quite a lonely voice in the wilderness, and you've often got pilloried for it as well. I think you've been the subject of quite a few controversies, including that famous one, or rather notorious one, about you not saluting the flag on Republic Day. Maybe you'd just like to address that quickly because you have addressed it in the book.
Very, very simply, it is a matter of record
Yeah.
that no one has held the office of Chief of Protocol
Hmm.
for a longer period in modern India's history than
Hmm.
yours truly,
Which is 5 years, right?
which is 5 years. Just 5 days short of 5 years to be precise.
Hmm.
And so I knew what the rules were.
Hmm.
You see, it is the saluting base.
Hmm.
The salute is being given by whom?
Hmm.
By the president's bodyguard.
Right.
The salute is being given to the president.
President of India. Yeah.
Okay? It's not being given to the visiting dignitary.
Right.
It's not being given to anybody else who's present on the dais that day.
Right.
There are no two views about it. These are standard military procedures.
Right.
So, I mean, the point is the public does not know what lay behind a particular decision. And it is our job as people in responsible positions to, educate them, not miseducate them. So those silly controversies which were, you didn't go to yoga day.
Yoga day.
Yes, I know. But I didn't have to say it, that, and my yoga guru will testify to it.
Oh, you do yoga,
I
really?
do yoga very regularly,
Interesting.
but I didn't say that I do.
Hmm.
That was my private life.
Hmm.
And I wasn't invited. And I would not be invited, just like the President of India will not be invited, where the chief guest is the Prime Minister. You see, that is the point. There is a state hierarchy. In state hierarchy, the President, the Vice President, and then, of course, the Chief Justice of India and the Prime Minister. So you go by that. That's all. Now, this is not known to the public.
Right.
Or it should not be known if necessary. Informed sections of public know this. Others do not know. But for anybody to rig up a controversy on that, the gentleman who raised it subsequently came to see me. I shall not take his name.
I know you've not mentioned his name even in the book.
No, I will not. It's not my this thing to name people unnecessarily. So it's all right. Goes on.
Do you sometimes feel you were singled out because of your religion?
I won't say that. I was singled out for X, Y, or Z reasons. Religion was not my requirement.
And the last question, sir, for me is really, your comment on Kashmir and what has happened there recently with the abrogation of Article 370 and 35A. You call it a show of brute majoritarianism.
Am I the only one to say that?
Certainly not. So would you like to develop that idea further and what can be done there now?
You see, firstly, there is a constitutional process which is listed in the Constitution of India, in Article 1 or 2, I forget which one it is.
This is why we need Pranab Mukherjee, even now.
He was fabulous.
We could remember every article, I think, of the Constitution.
So it is there that it is in the power of Parliament to create new states.
Right.
Okay. Or change the boundaries of new states, etc., etc. It's all there listed.
Yeah.
And you have to observe the process. New states have been created. States have been merged. There's nothing novel about it. It has happened many a time. But a certain process has to be followed. That's one side of it. That is procedural. But beyond that is what is the impact of it? Is there public support for it? To what extent is there a public support for it? Now, everybody who functioned within the framework of Government of India knew that 370 over time had been denuded of its hard content. But for the people of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, it had become a sentimental issue. So you have to go about it in a certain way. My understanding of it and understanding of a lot of people is that that process was not followed. It was, a decision was steamrolled, and that was not a good thing to do.
Do you think there's any recourse to that now?
I shall not resort to that publicly. I have my own views about it, but they better remain off public record. Enough has been said about it by a lot of people, not just in India. You see, one of the things which I can take immodestly credit for is that when I was ambassador to UN, I led a team,
Mm.
a Government of India team of officials and ministers who were able to fight back the Pakistani onslaught.
Mm.
And then, for the purposes of United Nations, this Kashmir issue almost vanished. Pakistanis kept trying different ways and means, but they didn't succeed,
Mm.
because the world understood what India was saying and advocating.
Mm.
Now, if you see what has happened in the last 1 year,
Mm.
this issue seems to come back on the international agenda one way or the other.
Mm.
So I think it's not a wise thing to do.
Mm.
It could have been done differently, but for whatever reasons, which I shall not go into, it was not.
Hamid Ansari, thank you so much for talking to the New Indian Express, and I would recommend that your book be read. By many a happy accident, recollections of a life. It's quite an interesting read, and it not just about your public life, but also a lot about your growing up years. And I found it quite fascinating, with a foreword by the late Pranab Mukherjee, who I think everyone misses deeply. Thank you very much, sir, for talking.
Thank you very much. And let me say at the end that you are perhaps amongst the very few interviewers in the last few days who has really read the book. All others have read 2 pages.
Well,
And
that is why I have done the interview, because I have read it. Thank you so much. But it was
thank
a
you.
very good read. Thank you.